Okay, it's Apple clock says it's time to go. Go ahead, Jules. Start
Yes,
her up.
sir. All right. Good afternoon, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you are not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell phone to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Chairman Kobliss.
Welcome, everybody. Our legal counsel, Jonathan Rack, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would imagine you guys have probably memorized this by now, but I have to read. In accordance with the Governor's State of Emergency Declaration and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors Continuity of Government Ordinance and General Assembly 2020 Budget Amendments 28 and 137, Loudoun Water will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities will be discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other meeting information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website, and a recording of this meeting will be available in board docs at the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. During presentation, staff will pause for questions and discussion. There will be an opportunity for discussion after each presentation, and we will also monitor and recognize the hand raise feature. For each action item, a roll call voice vote will be taken by the board secretary. Opportunity for public comment was provided within the meeting notice. Any written comments were provided to the board secretary and will be read during the public speaker's agenda item. Chairman opens meeting and asks board secretary, oh, I guess that's my cue. That should be in like different quotes so that I know that I'm not supposed to read that part. Okay, can I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
Sir, would you like me to take the roll call vote first, or the roll call first?
Roll call for what?
Roll call for attendance.
Oh, see, now you've gone too far on the thing, so I don't see that on the agenda. On the agenda. I see. Because it's on the statement. I got it.
Yes, sir.
See, I can't even read what I'm supposed to do. Ms. Board Secretary, could you please take the roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Allen?
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Byers?
Here.
Mr. Bonfils?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Kobliss?
Here.
Moody?
Here.
Ms. Sursakar?
You can just say Sursakar. Don't say Miss Sursakar. Just say Sursakar. It's fine.
Sursakar?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sultan?
Here.
Thank you. All present.
Okay, now may I have a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So moved for Marty.
And a second?
This is Angeline. I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Go ahead, Jewel.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils?
Yes.
Mr. Byers?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Sursakar?
Yes.
Mr. Sultan?
Yes.
And Mr. Kobliss?
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so board member comments. I'll go ahead and start. Not that I have much to say, but what a gorgeous day to be inside doing a Zoom call with the Loudoun Water Board today. We should open up all our windows. I did meet with one of our major clients for Loudon Water this week, and he is very, very concerned, his company, not just locally, but nationally, with, he's a data center company, and they're very, very concerned about what happened down in Tampa with the water and cybersecurity getting in and shutting off their water. It's like one of the things that they really don't have redundancy on. You know, they have redundant power and they have redundant fuel, but if they lost water, it would be pretty disastrous for them. So he's asked to talk with, I recommended Mike Beardsley to talk about it, but I think there was also an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was last week, and same thing about concerns around the country about what happened in Tampa. So I'm sure you're going to hear more. And as far as I'm concerned, and from what we've heard, and all of us have heard in our closed sessions, Loudon Water is, probably the best protected there is. So that's not a concern, but I just wanted to tell everybody that this is coming around, and and hopefully we'll never ever have to deal with it. That would just be horrendous. All right, Sean, why don't you go next?
Oh God, let's see if I can get this off mute here. Hold on.
You're off mute.
There we go. Okay, all right. Yeah, a call came in just as you said that, and that just blew everything up. So, thank you. Yeah, just to respond to what you said, Mark, I had some of those inquiries, not because of Tampa, when I was the chairman as well, and I think people were pretty satisfied. But the good thing about Tampa, as I read the story, is the controls worked as they were supposed to work. They set off the right alarms. They were able to shut off what they needed to shut off, so it didn't get into the system and so forth. So I would be surprised if we didn't have something as good or better as far as our controls. I didn't really have too much. I've had my 2 vaccinations. Yippee! I just happened to luck out and win the lottery on that one. No real reactions to either my wife or I. So fortunate to have that. So now I can go into the crowds and feel good about things. Now, still wear the mask. Still be. As we said, we're gonna run out into the biggest crowd we can find and say, hey. Interesting thing is, and Marty had it as well. You get a card, a CDC card that is certified that you've had the vaccine, and you're supposed to use that for travel, which is nice. But we have a grandchild, our first grandchild being born next month, so it was incumbent upon us to get that, and we were lucky to be able to get called and get in and get the vaccine. So. Hopefully everybody else can get it real soon as well. So good to see everybody, and nice spring day, as Mark said. Thank you.
Bill?
Yeah, good afternoon. I try not to comment about scientific things because it's not a good idea for finance majors to do that. But I read an article, I just read it today, about something called forever chemicals, PFAs. These are chemicals that do not break down under normal environmental conditions. And there was an article in Scientific American. These have been found in Fairfax County. They've been found in DC. They've been found in Prince William County in pretty high levels. And they said Loudoun County, but they didn't say where. And these chemicals don't break down, and apparently they believe they're carcinogenic, and they are not regulated by the EPA, which I'm not really sure why, but they're not regulated by the EPA. And I just bring it up because it's rare that I see articles like this, and they did mention Northern Virginia, especially all of our jurisdictions. So at some point, that might be something worthy of consideration when some of the engineers are in the room. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Terry?
I don't have anything. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Brent?
Yeah, hey, just wanted to thank Alton and Stefan for the study on the pads around the reservoir. Thanks for all the effort you guys put into that. Appreciated that. I'll also, maybe Jewel through you, but I'd like to add on to that study or supplement it. I've got the exhibit that Kimley Horn did. That's from 2016 on the bike shed for the Ashburn Metro. I've referenced that a couple times, and so I'd like to make sure that that's included with this study. And I'll also include the Federal Transit Administration. They have a document. It's their manual on pedestrian and bicycle connections to transit, and that also talks about the significance of the bike shed. What does that even mean? We talk about watersheds, but what's a bike shed? Maybe not everybody knows what that means or the importance associated with that. So Jewel, I'll send those to you, and then you can circulate those to everyone, and you guys can peruse those at your convenience. But thanks again to Stefan and Alton for doing that work.
Thanks, Brent. Keith?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have no comments for this meeting.
Okay, great. Angeline?
Yeah, I have a few comments. To begin with, I want to first of all thank Jewel and Carla. This is a Women's History Month, so want to reflect on that. Also want to reflect on the Women's International Day as well. So we have two other women, who I constantly work with on this board. So want to reflect that. Also, next I want to also thank Stefan and for that study. I had a thorough review of that study. I did a good analysis on that, and I have a few comments of my own, but I'm going to hold on to that because we're going to have another closed meeting and I can talk about that. With the cybersecurity, Mark, thank you for bringing that up. Regards to one of our clients who's had concerns about cybersecurity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. With the Florida cybersecurity hacking that happened, actually, I'm funny, nobody mentioned this, but they had actually completed a federally mandated security risk assessment, and they didn't implement those risk assessment lessons and tips into their emergency plan. So that's one of the reasons why Florida had to go through what they did. So that's just one of the key things that that's really important even for us moving forward as well. I've given a great thought on that, being on the board, and we'll talk more about that as well. And lastly, I just want to thank everybody, for their work that they do. We sit on the board, but in forefront of us, all our frontline workers and all the people who really keep our operations running smooth at Land and Water. I want to give a huge applaud to you. And I'm happy to see all the board members and look forward to this meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, Angeline. Marty?
Yeah, I'd like to second the compliments for Alton and Stefan on the study. That was very well done and very thorough. Secondly, we got contacted by an author that does articles in our little Potomac Green publication. He did an article once before, and he just contacted us, and our staff responded very quickly and with a lot of detail. I'd like to compliment them. And the only other thing is on this cybersecurity, we have a lot that we've done about how we can prevent it, but I'm wondering if we've done enough that if the bad thing happens, do we know how we're going to respond? So that's my comments.
Good question. Great. And last but not least, Mr. Bonfels. Mr. Bonfels. Jim, you still there?
Actually, Jim, your mic. Oh, there you go.
Unmute. Yeah, I had to unmute. I'd like to reflect the comments. The Cyber and Cyber Resiliency is a very, very very important main area. The other thing, like the study for around the reservoir, the trail was very complete. I appreciate it. It was done very timely. Third, yes, it is Women's History Month, and a lot of people forget about the history and about just to take a little second to think about that, is my mother got her law degree in Missouri, came to work in 1948 for the Solicitor's Office for the Labor Department, and through her career had tried cases in front of the Supreme Court and the Appellate Court, and she had to deal with some of that discrimination. She sometimes brought it home and told us stories like, well, I got in front of the Supreme Court bench, I was ready, I was there early, we should be, and I was preparing my brief, and the Justice Department sends an attorney to every time that any case comes in front of the Supreme Court of the United States, and the person said to her, "When's the lawyer from the Labor Department coming?" And she had to say, "She's here, sitting next to you." So these things happen. Many people have pioneered, and I just like to share that story. And there's a lot of great stories out there about women, and there's so many stories that of women that have pioneered and did that. She did take 11 years off to have 7 children from her career. So, well, thank you very much, and I get my second shot for Pfizer on Monday. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jim. Yep, I'm also lucky. I'm getting my second shot on the 25th, and I think Carla's getting her second shot around the same time. Let's see, General Manager's report. There's a tee up for. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Okay.
No.
We hear you.
Okay.
I hear you.
So, Carla, you're on the docket now.
Great, thank you. Several things to report on. First, thank you to members for acknowledging that March is Women's History Month. Very important. And, I want to just say how proud I am of all the women at Loudon Water and all the contributions they make on a daily basis. And thank you, Angeline, for being the only female on our board and bringing that perspective as well. To Mr. Byers' comments about the forever chemicals, we are aware of those. We're aware of the report. In fact, that was a topic of conversation in an earlier meeting today. And that fits in nicely with our next Water Resources Committee meeting, which will talk about water quality. So stay tuned for that, and we can give a perspective on those chemicals. We do want to let you know that we finally received official confirmation of the $10 million federal grant for Milestone Reservoir. We will be meeting with the state next month so they can answer all of our questions associated with the money before we sign anything. And so we're really looking forward to that. There is $6 million that has been awarded for the design phase. And then once we get through that, the $4 million will be released for construction of the reservoir. So we're excited about that. I did want to let you know that the new primary access road to Trap Rock is now open. And as a reminder, that access follows Energy Park Drive to a right on Red Triangle Lane, and then terminates at the front entrance gate of Trap Rock. So last month we reported that we would be coming forward to you at the August CIP for award of contract for phase 3 expansion of Broad Run. In association with that, our Loudon Water staff are preparing to submit a comment during the State Water Control Board public hearing on the Chesapeake Bay Watershed General Permit. And the purpose of that comment is to explain the need for reallocation of nutrient waste load for Broad Run due to this upcoming expansion. But we're doing a lot of work with DEQ, Nutrient Exchange, and other environmental stakeholders to develop a regulatory framework to address the need for additional waste load allocation. There's a lot of detail behind all of this. And so we wanted to let you know that we are planning a presentation for later this summer that will provide an update to you on nutrient management strategies and related wastewater planning efforts. And we can get into all the details of that at that time. Wanted to let you know that our annual flushing program begins on March 22nd. A couple educational events to bring to your attention. March 18th to the 25th is the Loudoun County Public Schools Regional Science and Engineering Fair. This is an annual event, and Loudoun Water participates as judges. And this will be the first time that this has been conducted virtually. March 25th to the 26th is the Academies of Loudoun Engineering Week. Again, an annual event where several of our engineers present to the students in 6 separate sessions over a 2-day period. And then finally, throughout March and April, we are providing water-themed presentations and Q&As to Loudoun Soil and Water Conservation District's Envirothon competition teams. And what that is a team-based natural resources competition for high school students. And so that it gives the students an opportunity to work with natural resource professionals. So we continue to stay engaged with our public school students. And I did want to mention that almost 1 year ago, it's March 13th to be exact, we had directed Loudoun Water staff to stress test our remote work capabilities in the event that we needed to revert to that on a large scale. And little did we know that for most people, they wouldn't be back in the office after that, that we've been at this for a year. And I just want to acknowledge that everyone is making sacrifices and work-life adjustments to keep Loudoun Water operating smoothly. And I couldn't be more proud of their work over the last year. And finally, some statistics for you. We have approved 444 applications for the utility assistance funding and have applied more than $245,000 to outstanding balances. We currently have 1,679 payment plans in place. And as far as new connections for the month of February, we had 156. And through this week, we added an additional 75, bringing our year-to-date total to 296. And with that, that's all I have.
Thanks, Carla.
Sure.
Jewel, do we have anybody for public comments?
No, sir, we don't have any public speakers.
Okay, great. Can I have a recommendation for adoption of agenda, please?
This
I'll
is
bring
Terry,
it
so
to-
moved.
Seconded by Mark.
Any comments? All right, go ahead and roll call, Jewel.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Byers,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Thursakar,
Yes.
Mr. Sultan,
Yes.
and Mr. Koblis.
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Okay, board committee action, finance committee. Terry, give a brief synopsis of the meeting.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We met a couple weeks ago. The primary purpose of the finance meeting was to talk about the 5-year plan of finance. That's a tool or model to determine our borrowing needs for the future. The current plan as presented to the committee calls for the possibility or the need to borrow $20 million in 2025. Keep in mind last year's 5-year plan of financing had us issuing $20 million in 23. That didn't happen. It got pushed back to 25, and it's quite possible it won't happen again. This is because of our conservative nature and accounting for ERCs. I won't get into it a little bit more on how that's done, but it's an action item today. Brian's going to be talking about it. So I just wanted to give a brief overview, but that was predominantly the meeting. We went through a January financial summary. The revenues were down slightly and expenses were up slightly. There were only 65 ERCs in January, which is low, but as Carla just said, there was 156 in February and 75, I guess, already in March. So that number's picking up a little bit. Total cash and equivalents of 320 million at the end of January with a 0.6% yield. Then we talked briefly about our work plan for the rest of the year, and the meeting adjourned at 8:27. So it was a quick meeting, and that's all I have.
Great. Sean, the audit committee meeting, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The audit committee met on March 3rd. Attending were two partners from Young, Hyde and Barber, our auditors, Jennifer Files, the partner in charge, and Brian Newland, who's their process controls and cyber partner. Committee members attending, in addition to myself, were Jim Bonfils, Mark Hoblis, and Martin Sultan. We just went over the scope of the 2020 audit. Let's see. We reviewed the scope and general extent of the audit, which will be similar to prior years. The pre-audit communication letter from Young, Hyde and Barber was included in the board docs for everyone's reference. We asked the auditors to perform an in-depth review of changes made in response to the pandemic to ensure adequate internal controls. The audit is underway, and we'll discuss the results sometime in May when that wraps up. That's my report.
Thanks. Jim, if you could give a brief synopsis of the Water Resources Committee meeting.
With or without my phone on mute. So we held the meeting on March 3rd, immediately after the audit committee meeting. It was very convenient. In attendance, besides myself, were Terry Allen, committee members, Terry Allen, Brent Campbell, and Marty Sultan. Other members of the board in attendance was Mark Hoblis and Sean Kelly. We had a full complement of staff there. The guests in attendance were Evan Grimm Nelson and John Ridenour Nelson from Ridenour from Nelson Bird Waltz, Mr. Paul Gilbert, and Mr. Dale Hummus from Water Resources. The meeting was called to order on time, and the agenda had been approved. The first item was the educational program update from Sue Crosby. There's a lot of details, six bullet points in the report. I suggest that you take a look at it. It was a very complete and report with some a really good view of the future and the present and what we're doing in education. The Reservoir Park update and cost estimate by Stefan Haas. Mr. Haas provided a detailed update and the most recent cost estimate. There's still some more work to do. Overall reduction at this point is about 84,000 from the other estimate. So we keep working on that. There was we had a discussion about the bike shed and bike racks, and Chairman Koblis suggested that the staff go ahead and add additional bike racks. I'd like to note that that in this report, the bike racks was doubled from 18 to 36. And so they're talking about maybe doubling that because the cost is so relatively low, doubling that to 72 or maybe 100. So there'll be some more discussion about the bike racks. There was a long discussion about the ICPRB. Mr. Peterson and Ms. Kennel provided a great overview of the Potomac River Basin and the critical role that they play, and potentially what our role is and what it could be. Mark Peterson is a member of that commission as a member, not as a participant. Well, it's kind of complicated, but I'll let him explain it. So that was a very good report, and I will attend the upcoming meetings just as since it's open to the public. So then we discussed the work plan, and the work plan continues as described before. We'll have quarterly meetings, and the topics of the Reservoir Park and the education plan will continue, but we'll also add into other topics around the EPA, VDH, and DEQ, some of their requirements, and of course the water quality and some of the issues that were brought up today about the elements that don't break down. So that was the report. There's 3 pages of it in board docs. So if you have any questions, ask them now, or you can send me an email. Thank you very much. Oh, we ended on time. At 18 versus no end.
Thanks, Jim. Consent agenda, we don't have anything new on it. So the action agenda, Brian Carbs with a brief view of the 5-year plan of finance, hence the word brief.
Sure thing. Good afternoon. Thank you. I will be presenting the 5-year plan of finance for the years 2021 through 2025. I did want to mention that we did consult with Davenport, our financial advisors, on this, and they agree with everything that you'll see here today. This slide is really just to show you how we come up with the 5-year plan, and basically the outcome is whether we need to borrow any money to fund any operating or capital needs. So just a couple considerations. Our CIP for the 5-year period from 2021 through 2025 did increase approximately $38 million from what was presented to you last year. The main driver for that is the extension of service into the TPA and JLMA, as well as some more accurate cost estimates for Milestone Reservoir and Goose Creek Connection. This came up at the Finance Committee, so I did want to mention it. That $10 million from FEMA for Milestone Reservoir has not been included in the 5-year plan because that came after this was developed. So we'll factor that in the next iteration of the model. Growth estimates remain conservative. If you'll recall from the 2021 operating budget, staff performed an internal analysis and did decide to deviate from the county projection for 2021. And so we did reduce our ERC projection to 2,200 for this year. The estimates for the next years, 2022 through 2025, are in line with the current county estimates. So as Mr. Allen mentioned, the plan does call for $20 million in debt issuance in 2025. That was pushed out from 2023 in last year's model, and that was due to a large increase in availability charge revenue that we received in December. We received almost 1,300 ERCs in December. And then, as you know, we do historically underspend against our operating and capital budget. So those two things combined pushed out our need to borrow money. And then just a couple notes on your policies. You do have a policy that you implemented in 2018 based on feedback from the rating agencies that said our total annual debt service coverage without availability charges must be at least 1 times our coverage, and throughout the 5-year period it ranges from 1.84 to 2.47. And then another one of your policies is that debt service coverage with availability charges must be 1.5 times above. And as you can see, we are well above that throughout the 5-year window. And so this is the actual model. Just a couple notes here. This does include the 2.5% rate increase that you approved late last year. These 3% rate increases are not approved by the board yet. We are undergoing the 2021 rate study right now. And so we will be coming back to you later this fall with the proposed new rate increases for the years 2022 through 2024. And then, as you can also note, the non-operating revenues begin to decline towards the end of this 5-year window as the ERC connections begin to drop off. And then the debt service, you can see there's a new debt service in 2025 with the possibility of the $20 million issuance. And so finally, this slide is just to show you your coverage ratios and your ending cash balance. And as you can see, your ending cash balance does stay above the 2 times cash floor, and your ratios are all above the 1 and 1.5 times that are required. So today we're asking for your endorsement of this 5-year plan. And as I mentioned, the 2021 rate study is underway, and we will update this in conjunction with that to make sure there's no change in need to borrowing and that you stay in compliance with all of your policies. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Angelina has a question.
Yeah. So I had a question. Were we given this 5-year plan? Were we sent this pre-read prior to the board meeting? I don't recall getting it.
Yes, it was presented to the Finance Committee, and then it would have been in the package, the board package for today.
Okay. I apologize. Maybe it was just a mishap and missed it. But okay, thank you. I'll take a look at it.
Can I get a motion to approve?
This is Terry, I motion to approve the plan as presented to the board.
This is Sean, I'll second.
Sounds like Sean seconded. Any more discussion? Jewel, go ahead and roll call.
Yes, sir. Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Byers?
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils? Mr. Bonfils?
I think he's having problems with his internet because I've been hearing strange things. So maybe he's listening. Keep
Okay.
going.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Sursakar?
Yes.
Mr. Sultan?
Yes.
And Mr. Koblis?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There's no new business.
I can get my, yes.
Thank you, sir. I'll record that as a yes.
No new business. Informational items. The 2021 legislative update by Micah View. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
All right, good. All those French courses I took in high school and college paid off.
This is what it all built up to. All right. Well, thank you, Jewel, and thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, board. My name is Mike View, and I'm pleased to provide you with a brief legislative update. So as most of you know, Virginia's General Assembly convenes each January for legislators to deliberate and enact legislation. This year was supposed to be a short session, primarily focused on the budget, but a special session was convened, extending legislative activities a couple more weeks. General Assembly session finally adjourned here on the 1st of March. Unless otherwise modified by an enactment clause, the bills that you see will become law on July 1, pending the governor's signature. So Loudoun Water monitors and coordinates legislative affairs through our association memberships with BWWAA, VAMWA, and of course we stay engaged with the county through Gwen Kennedy and the County Legislative Review Group. In partnership with those groups, we track legislation that may impact the organization's mission. We communicate and coordinate internally to determine the level of impact. And then we go back to our association partners to help inform their lobbying, letting them know where the rubber meets the road with some of the proposed bills. So finally, it puts us in a position to either provide support for those favorable bills or voice opposition to those unfavorable bills. And 2021, just like every year before, provided a broad range of legislation that had the potential to impact the authority's mission. I think what I'll do here is provide a short summary for a few bills and then call out the wastewater WIT 3 topic and speak to that on the next slide. An important bill that passed this year was on the topic of water auditing and leak repair. And so now for both water withdrawal as well as water distribution, Loudoun Water and other water purveyors will have to develop 1, a water auditing plan, and 2, a leak detection and repair plan. These plans must be approved by the state and moving forward will become a condition of Virginia water withdrawal permitting.
Excuse
the impact
me,
for the bill is
Micah?
still.
Mike, I'm sorry.
Mike,
Oh,
I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a question for Mr.
Oh,
Koblis.
apologies.
And your slides weren't advancing as well. So
well, that was my comment, that the slides were not moving.
Sorry, team.
There we go.
There we go. Again, we'll rewind back to that slide, but what we're really trying to lay out for the board is that we work in coordination with our industry partners as well as our county stakeholders to provide some perspective on where some of the proposed legislation would impact our mission. Let me see if, apologies for the delay. There we go. The auditing and leak repair bill did pass, and again, it affects us moving forward for both water withdrawal and water distribution, where the authority will have to develop an auditing plan as well as a leak detection and repair plan. We think the impact for this is still roughly 2 years out. Virginia State Water Control Board needs to develop the regulatory framework to actually implement these repair provisions, but we are tracking this as an industry and as an organization. And part of the role of monitoring legislation is to ensure that we're pre-positioned for compliance. And so I want to give the board a sense of confidence that that's happening within the organization, both through our monitoring efforts as well as our internal coordination efforts. A big issue down in Richmond this year was environmental justice, and the industry, as well as Virginia Manufacturers Association, other trade associations, did a lot of work to ultimately kill 2 bills related to environmental justice. The first would have created an interagency environmental justice work group, which ultimately would serve as an advisory role to any subsequent administrative proposals. That particular bill was actually moved forward into special session. So there was a pretty strong sense that that interagency work group would be established. And we were fortunate, at least in this latest session, to have avoided that. But it's likely, as with the second environmental justice bill, it's likely that these will be seen again in future general assemblies. And there's a good one in here for Board Member Kelly for financial reporting. We were actually given a bit of flexibility this year, and we have an extension in law now to move from 3 months to 5 months after the end of the fiscal year, the period in which our authority must have an annual financial transactions audit.
Micah, Mr. Sultan has a question.
Please go, Mr. Sultan.
I don't know if you were going to cover it, but was there any legislation on eminent domain you have listed there?
Yes, there was. That was a smaller bill. It's procedural. What the new law sets up is that an authority or political subdivision would have to provide prior notice to the individual or parcel owner prior to submitting their certificate of claim or certificate of take.
And is there a time limit? Is there a time limit for that?
And that will become law July 1.
No, I mean, how much in advance do you have to notify the property owner?
I do not believe that's specified in the legislation. It simply needs to be prior to your engagement in filing a formal claim.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. We'll go ahead and move forward to the most important piece, and that's our WIP 3 wastewater bill. And this was just absolutely necessary. I'll provide a bit of context, and you may recall this from previous board presentations with Kendra Sviam, but in the summer of 2019, Virginia proposed what they call WIP 3, the Watershed Implementation Plan Phase 3. And what it does is set forth how the Commonwealth plans to meet the goals set forth under the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. That rulemaking process seemed difficult for our industry. Ultimately, many of the arguments that we made with respect to cost and practicality were not included into the WIP 3 framework. So this subsequently led to a lawsuit in Hanover County Circuit Court. And this is in the normal progression or evolution of moving towards legislation. That was critical, right? It ultimately put the administration, VAMWA, which is our association, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, James River Waterkeeper. So a broad group of stakeholders had to come together to compromise and craft this legislation. And I'll say ushering this through was not easy. It was absolutely the most intensive bill that we worked on this year, but we were fortunate to pass both houses. And what this does is supplant this floating cap approach, the pernicious part of WIP 3, and take us back to the old paradigm where we have a fixed number approach. So we know exactly what our pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus are at our wastewater plant, and it puts us in a position to design accordingly. There are some other targeted investments and compliance schedules that were associated with that legislation. That's, again, primarily along the James River. But we're fortunate as an industry to have gotten traction with this and really gotten the ear of those legislators, both in terms of cost and implementation. What House Bill 2129 does is save the state about $175 million by providing an alternative lower cost pathway to meeting our compliance goals. And most importantly for the authorities here in Central and Northern Virginia, we once again have certainty about what our nutrient allocation looks like. So you can imagine moving to the previous paradigm, it keeps us in a position to continue to leverage the planning and the nutrient management strategies that we've developed. And so with that, I'll take some questions.
Seeing none at this time, Micah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Alton or Alton, I'm sorry, I always mess that up.
So while they load the presentation and Alton gets ready, I just have a couple things to say. I think hopefully all of you had the opportunity to review the study and really read it in depth. This presentation certainly doesn't do justice for the amount of work that went into preparing it. And it really was a collaborative effort, not only among Loudon Water staff, but our partner Nova Parks played a big role in this, as did conversations with the county's Department of Parks and Rec and other county staff. It really, again, collaborative effort, and I think it really shows in the complexity and comprehensiveness of the study that was prepared. And so with that, I will turn it over to Alton.
Thank you, Carla, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Pleased to be here this afternoon and return these results of the Beaver Dam Reservoir Paved Perimeter Trail feasibility study. And really, before I dive right in, I just wanted to make a few acknowledgments. I wanted to thank all of you for really, having the competence and staff to perform this work completely in-house. I want to acknowledge Stefan. He was my partner in really the bulk of the study and preparing the report. And then a host of additional staff here at Loudon Water, Pam Kennel and Bradley Schmitz, Sue Crosby, Robin Bailey, the GMO team, Dale. We worked with the County Parks and Rec staff. And last but not least, I want to thank Paul Gilbert and his staff at Nova Parks for their contributions to our work. And they really proactively initiated some complementary work that we'll discuss a bit later. So again, echoing Carl, I hope you guys are able to peruse the study report, but if not, I'm going to try to give you the highlights here. And before I begin, I want to pause and ask if there are any initial questions before we dive in. So really, I've divided up the presentation into an introduction, what I think is some relevant background information, and then the physical feasibility of the trail, followed by the regulatory or permitting considerations, and then lastly, possible funding sources and next steps. And so I wanted to begin by really recapping the direction that was given back in November And that was directing staff to evaluate the feasibility of recreational trails around the reservoir and report the findings here today. There was a friendly amendment added by Mr. Campbell to specify that this was walking and biking trails. And one thing that I also did was we went back and listened to the meeting recording from November to make sure that we really captured the essence of what you, the board, was asking and directing staff to do. And a couple of other notable things that came out of that is, I know Mr. Allen, he emphasized that he believes that the County Board of Supervisors, certain members, kind of looking to Loudon Water to help with trail development along this corridor, and that public support exists, and we really look at all possible avenues in studying this. And then Mr. Kelly, I believe it was, emphasized that we include an examination of possible funding sources. So taking all that into consideration, diving into the study, we wanted to clarify what were our key assumptions in these 3 items before you. Really, the study itself, had to set some boundaries. So we focused on a 10-foot wide paved perimeter trail, similar to in width and everything to the WNOD trail, and that this would be in addition to, or in some cases intermingled with, the existing natural trails out there. And then the other big item is that we will likely have needs for adequate culverts and bridges at drainage ways all along the route. And so shifting over to some of the relevant background information, I really wanted to, I know many of you are pretty well familiar with Beaver Dam, but this graphic provides a really good visual to set the stage. So constructed in 1972, really the community believes that this is a gem for the greater community in the Ashburn area and beyond. And the reservoir itself, it covers about 310 acres, but we actually own, in fee simple, 8 parcels that encapsulate the reservoir. And those parcels cover an area of approximately 628 acres. And then this final section of the slide here, the reservoir itself today, in the northwest and northern areas, there's an existing gravel driveway that surrounds the reservoir. And then the remainder is it's perimeter surrounded by natural trails, varying degrees throughout the rest of the perimeter. And actually, I'm gonna back up for one moment and just I wanted to kind of emphasize that some areas of these trails are more well defined, particularly along the eastern side, and then when we get towards the southern and the southwestern portions of the reservoir, development is less intense in this area adjacent to these properties, and so the trail is the natural trail is a little bit less defined there. And so, as most of you also are aware, we partnered with Nova Parks, the county, and the public over about a 2-year period in 2015 to 2017. And we developed a strategic concept plan document for Beaver Dam. It's a comprehensive 80+ page master plan for activities and development around the reservoir. And this document established the 4 guiding principles that you see here for guiding the activities and the development there at the reservoir. And further, what came out of that was the concept development plan that you see before you here, and that really focused on 3 focal areas around the reservoir. Of course, we're all well familiar with Reservoir Park, but then future focal points of Reservoir Preserve or visitor/education center here a bit to the north, and then improvements around the Reservoir Road, western access to the water. Those are the focal points, and then it envisioned both wetland and woodland preserve type areas on the remaining portions of the Loudon Water owned parcels. And the concept plan itself spoke to more of accessible trails and paved trails at these focal points, and then perhaps transitioning to natural surface trails, leaving these focal points and extending around the perimeter of the reservoir. And so a final piece of background information that I wanted to point you to is that we examined Beaver Dam's proximity to existing major biking and multi-use paved trails in the wider community. And so all along the Belmont Ridge corridor over the last decade plus, there have been a host of I guess county and VDOT sponsor transportation improvements and widening of this corridor. And really what you have today is almost a full, complete link of paved multi-use trails along the roadway itself, extending nearly from Brambleton all the way into Lansdowne, and with nice connections to the WNOD trail where it crosses there. And what's happening right now is this year the county is completing this final section of widening between Truro Parish and down to North Star Boulevard near the entrance to Reservoir Park. That work's ongoing, and with that we'll complete the link of some of these dashed lines here. And what this will do is really, and then our final keystone here of some of the improvements we're doing at the frontage of Reservoir Park will really create this true link and corridor to the broader community. And really, one last thing I'll highlight on this particular slide is this map shows that while we have this paved corridor along Belmont Ridge Road, the county's Linear Parks and Trails Initiative, or the Emerald Ribbons as it's also been called, it's focused on this sort of the Greenway corridor along Beaver Dam and then Goose Creek, these buffer areas that parallel to a certain extent Belmont Ridge Road. And so, these are focused on within the bounds of county policy and everything more natural surface type trails. We'll get a little bit more to that in a few moments. As I'm rounding out the background section, I'll just pause once again to see if there are any initial questions before I move into the feasibility study results.
Yeah, I have a quick question, Alton, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you go back, so that you can actually ride on a bike on that pink, that's all paved?
Correct. So what you see here north of the Greenway on both sides of Belmont Ridge Road, there is a paved 10-foot wide asphalt paved, generally multi-use trail. Perhaps you're familiar with some of the access, I think the WNOD. Yep.
I'm looking at the part, where it looks like it makes a right on Sicklen and it goes down across the bridge and then comes back up. That's all rideable in there too as well, right? Under the Greenway?
Yeah, and I will caveat that by saying, so it transitions from multi-use paved to sidewalk, but I believe there's some wider sidewalks through Goose Creek Village, and you would have to make use of the Sicklen Road bridge across, the shoulder of that bridge across the Greenway. But then there's a development here with multi-use trails that come back up and connect in with those that parallel Belmont Ridge Road. And I believe with some additional improvements ongoing or recently completed across the Greenway interchange, that's another option to pick up with the trails on the south side there. And then again, down here, these are just a few. This is really the true broken link right now, is this segment on the west side in parallel to our property frontage. That's what's ongoing right now. I think they're starting the utility relocation work, but I do know that the county, it's in their capital plan, and I believe construction is supposed to get underway this year for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome.
Mr. Moody has a question.
Yes, Mr. Moody.
Yes, hi, Alton. I just want to start. I thought this study was really very well put together, and particularly the executive summary. I just want to say, the analysis, you leveraging the red, yellow, green scorecard. That was a great way to get a quick synopsis of what every attribute or criteria how it was coming together, and what the recommendation. My question goes into, though, I want to ask about the leveraging what you're defining as primitive trails, gravel driveways, and you just mentioned other nearby trails. Do you have any sense of what percentage of the overall new paved trails can leverage the primitive trails or gravel driveways? Is there any thoughts?
Well, really, generally 100% of those existing driveways could be leveraged. I may address that question in more detail. Possibly, I think it's the next slide, actually. I can get into that a little bit further, but in general, about 100% of those driveways could be leveraged as part of, continual development of the trails out there.
So by leveraging the primitive trails and the gravel driveways, is that constitute almost 100% of the new trails, or there's going to be gaps where you're going to have to create new trails and it won't, there's nothing that exists now. That's what just.
Well, and that's what I was alluding to earlier on the southern and southwest portions of the reservoir. The natural trails are less defined.
Yeah.
So it just really kind of depends on, you know, obviously stream crossings and the feeder streams to the reservoir. Those will have to be, you know, bridged and so forth. But, you know, in general, the framework of a trail system, a complete trail system, is there today when you look at the natural pathways and the driveway.
Okay, and I'm just not familiar with in terms of developing, you know, taking a primitive trail and turning it into a paved trail. Is there a huge cost savings by leveraging that, or just trying to get a sense of what the cost savings of leveraging the existing primitive trails?
I suppose there would be some level of cost savings, but I don't necessarily think it would be significant given the nature of some of these more primitive trails.
Understood. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, great questions though. Thank you very much. So, you know, I've just got a few more slides here, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But so really, the core results of the study from a physical or technical perspective, you know, our findings indicate that a paved perimeter trail is technically feasible, but you know, as I'm sure you all saw in the executive summary, some of these items that are before you here on this slide would be more challenging to design, permit, construct, and some will be costlier, you know, just in general, and others have a greater, what I'll call as a social environmental impact. So just to briefly describe a few of these, we have a 250-foot wide senior right-of-way across major portions of the western side of the reservoir, and part of that gravel driveway is within that area. I've spoken with Dominion, and they're completely agreeable to working with us to utilize those areas and that driveway and so forth, with certain caveats. Topography in general, I mean, it's not too challenging. You can kind of see here there's some steeper topography is expected near Goose Creek and the dam, but I think that stuff can be overcome. But there are ADA and access requirements that you get into when you start talking about a paved, more accessible trail. I think this one's a big one. We have fairly significant forested buffers and a reservoir protection area that I'll talk more about in a moment surrounding the entire reservoir. And Loudoun Water does not control land use policy in the county, so really those policies are put into place by the county, but to protect water resources and water quality on behalf of Loudoun Water. So I think that one's a big one. Dam security, and then some of these more run-of-the-mill items for designing a project like this: wetlands impact, stormwater management, and really floodplains and the stream crossings. These are the items that are going to be more challenging to permit, costlier to permit, and really just more expensive to construct. We have some experience. We constructed a bridge here with the dam improvements project, and we're continuing with things with Reservoir Park as well. So just to kind of give you a flavor of some of what was presented in the study.
Alton, Ms. Sursakar, and then Mr. Sultan have questions.
Absolutely, Ms. Sursakar, go right ahead.
Alton, great presentation. Just a question here for you. The driveway, your partnership with Dominion Energy and the driveway, you mentioned some caveats. Would you mind telling us what those caveats would be?
They're very minor. Again, this was speaking with their right-of-way representative that we work with all the time on agreements, encroachments within their right-of-ways. And, I explained to him the nature of what we were studying here, and his general feedback was, that's not a problem. If say you guys wanted to come through and put down asphalt and pave this driveway all the way through, it's a shared use driveway for both of us, so they would benefit. His only major feedback was that any damage that would occur, as they have very large construction equipment in there working on these transmission power towers and lines, that if there was damage done to the paved roadway, that they wouldn't want to be responsible for that. Those sorts of things, but I say those are relatively minor in the scheme of the scope of all of this.
So if they're not responsible, then Loudoun Water is responsible. I want to know who is responsible.
Yeah, they're basically, they would want us, we would always have to enter into what's called an encroachment agreement with Dominion for something like this, or whenever our utilities cross their major rights of way. And so in the terms of that agreement, they would basically say that if there was damage done, they wouldn't fix it, or that Loudon Water would be responsible for it. So, but we would go in knowingly to that agreement.
Now, Alton, do we have an encroachment agreement in place right now, or are we going to be devising one?
We would devise one for this project. We don't really, we did some temporary encroachment agreement work, and I think some of it may have been permanent when we did the dam improvements project a couple of years ago. Just talking about changes that occurred where the right of way overlaps with our facility, and there were provisions for construction, work and access and storage of materials and so forth inside of that right of way during the work. But other than that, we don't have anything else currently on the record to my knowledge with this existing right of way.
So Alton, this is we just signed a memorandum of understanding with Dominion, so we do have something in place for encroachments.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind sharing that with the board? I would like to look at that, and I would like to do a deeper dive into our water policy and see how that's integrated, because this is a key part. And I'm glad I asked you. I'm sure, I have full trust in you guys that you would have mentioned it anyways. So, but I really would like to see the agreement, and I would like to really, parallel that with our water policy and take a deep analysis on that. So that is something, if you would please make a note of, I would greatly appreciate it.
Okay, certainly. And I will say, just to tack on to what you were saying, he worked closely with our council and Dominion and their council to develop this sort of a form of encroachment agreement that's more flexible for us to more efficiently, because we're crossing these things with water and sewer all the time, and we wanted to get to a more flexible and efficient way of doing that. And so this is a little outside, I think, of utility crossings of these rights of way. But I think the same premise applies here. So I just wanted to make that little caveat. But thank you very much for your question. And let's see, Mr. Salton, please.
Yeah, you might be getting to this in your presentation, but the cost of this trail surprised me. What did it say in the report? Was it $6 to $9 million? Something in that category?
Yeah.
Could you give some more detail on where that cost is coming from?
I absolutely can. I think in 2 more slides, I was going to cover that one. Do you mind if I hold off until then?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you for your question, though. Mr. Campbell?
Yes, thanks. I'm not sure, maybe I misread this. Your third bullet point here saying a few items will have greater social and environmental impact. I read that as in positive impact, but am I misunderstanding you that you're suggesting that there's negative social and environmental impacts?
No, so I think a little bit of both in my measure and studying all of this. I think, in terms of when you look at something like the forested buffers section that I have highlighted here, and maybe I better get ahead to the next slide here in a moment, but like I said, the county has certain zoning overlay districts that they have established in the county, and one of which is a 300-foot reservoir protection area buffer, which extends around the majority of our parcels outside of the reservoir surface. And part of the provisions of that overlay are, prohibiting development, pervious development, for example, within those areas. Of course, waivers and special exceptions are possible and done every day. But when I say environmental impact, I think that policy is in place as a deterrent to environmental impacts that have a more negative connotation, and clearing trees and building this paved trail, this conceptual paved trail would certainly be an impact in that respect. But to your point, there are positive social impacts to continued development of this perimeter trail for the broader community. I hope that helps answer your question a bit.
Yeah, no, thank you. It does. It does. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other main item that we looked at was the regulatory feasibility, or the permitting side of things. And so again, our findings showed that permitting this trail is certainly feasible. We believe it will be a high level of effort similar to Reservoir Park. And really diving into that a bit here, in terms of the county's the new comprehensive plan. The plan is clear. It supports park development at Beaver Dam and in this vicinity. And we actually, as part of the Reservoir Park project, got a determination stating that we do not need a commission permit for that project, nor do we need any further commission permits for further park development out here. So that's a good thing. But and there was an appendix to the report that we did sort of a deep dive into the comprehensive plan, if you were able to read it. But there are a lot of contrasting discussions and content in the comp plan that really speak to what Mr. Campbell and I were just talking to a couple of minutes ago about the different environmental considerations. Those are heavy in the comp plan, and the discussion of water quality and protecting water resources was big. So again, the comp plan isn't a regulatory document per se, but I think it does have a tendency to guide county policy when you get into the special exceptions and the waivers and the comments that come back on site planning documents and so forth. So I mentioned that in the study. The next item here, parcel zoning. Based on the current parcel zoning for the parcels that we own, we can expect that a special exception will be required based on the use alone. But then we have, as alluded to earlier, there are a number of zoning overlay districts and FSM facility standards requirements on the county side that I've listed a few here. The Scenic Creek Valley Buffer as it relates to Goose Creek, the floodplain overlay district. They regulate the steep slopes or the topographic areas that were shown on the previous slide. And then the big one being the 300-foot reservoir protection area buffer. And there's actually a mapping of that depicted here on this slide and how it pretty much encompasses the majority of our parcels. So, really it just, I think, again, it's possible, but I think we're looking at a heavy effort here to permit this and some extensive waivers of some of these requirements. Lastly, it's not here on the slide, but I did want to acknowledge, Pam Kennel and her team. They did some extensive peer utility research for other reservoir owners with trail systems, and really, if you were able to take a look in the study, there was a range of situations and philosophies, and I think a lot of those were driven by the level of control that utilities had over the land area surrounding their reservoirs. And really what we have here is kind of like the holy grail of reservoir ownership, that we own all of the surrounding land, so we're able to completely control items that impact the water quality and the forested buffer areas. And so really that was it. They all had different philosophies and opinions on different things, but overall they were all concerned with water quality, and I won't belabor that point too much further. Mr. Campbell, let's see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. With those examples, it wasn't mentioned, but I thought I'd just ask the question. I'm assuming that none of the examples that were given of other reservoirs and utilities were next to a metro rail. Is that accurate? I know it didn't say, but perhaps one of them is, and it just wasn't mentioned.
I don't believe any of those example utilities were in the proximity of a metro system like ours is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. From my perspective, that's a key driver here. A lot of reservoirs, like Percival had that reservoir up on the mountain. It's very rural. And so paving that wouldn't make a lot of sense. But when you're within 2 miles, 2.5 miles of a metro rail that connects to Washington, D.C. and Tyson's and everything else, I think that's a significant distinction. But thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Byers?
Oh, yes, Mr. Byers, go right ahead.
Alton, great presentation. I wondered if and your presentation may not be the place to do this, but any concern raised regarding safety? As someone who does quite a bit of bike riding, and I ride on the WMOD, cycling is dangerous enough, and most people are fine. But when you have pedestrian traffic in the same place as you have cycling traffic, just ask anyone who's a volunteer for the Ashburn Volunteer Fire Department. You see how many accidents there are on the WOD. I just wondered, is there any issue? Do we have a concern about safety if we were to embark on putting trails around the entire reservoir?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. It was given a slight amount of attention in the actual study report. I think it fell into the category of, we're expecting to have a number of stream crossings. Some of those may be, minor, but others may be a little bit more substantial in terms of bridging or larger culverts. And so it was highlighted in that way. And there was a parallel drawn to, if you recall, we used to have the access bridge to the inlet control tower at the dam. And that was what was kind of referred to as an attractive nuisance. And so you had a lot of kids out there diving off of it. And it was definitely a safety concern. So we did remove that as part of the project, you'll recall. And so I think some of that's inevitable with continued development at Beaver Dam. But I think you make an important point. We have to kind of take things in a pace at which, even like, for example, our partnership with Nova Parks in managing the recreation out there is being able to, have eyes in all places to patrol the expanse of what's out there, 7+ miles with those sorts of concerns in mind. I think that's a pretty good observation on your part.
Thank you, Alton. Great report.
Thank you very much. So, lastly, rounding out our study, you guys gave the great direction to examine possible funding sources. And, in parallel with that, we wanted to develop at least a high-level cost estimate so that we would understand order of magnitude and create an understanding of what this project looks like. And so we developed this estimate coming in at around $6 million. We've put a range in there, which is really standard practice at this very high level feasibility level. We also utilized what I like to say is a pretty well defensible, like the development industry understands it. Whenever you're going to do a project in Loudoun County, you have to bond it using the unit prices that they set forth. And so they had a nice, and that was included in the appendix to the report. We really utilized that as the big ticket items for this estimate. And so it did come in around $6 million, but I wanted to mention, we've talked with the Loudoun County Parks and Rec, Nova Parks, and looked a little closer at some of these possible stream crossings or bridges or culverts. And, both of them with a little bit greater expertise in trail development, they feel like their gut feel is it's probably towards the higher end of this range. And so with all that in mind, really getting into the true ask of this possible funding sources question. So just wanted to run you through a couple of highlights here. As you know, we had the memorandum from Jonathan last fall, and that, we're pretty well limited in what we can do in terms of funding a project like this. So we went forth and had some discussions with staff at Loudoun County Parks and Rec, and they expressed, complete interest in continuing to partner with their Linear Parks and Trails initiative. I've highlighted on the map here on this slide, they have their Goose Creek Point Park, I think it's called, there to the north, and then Tillett Park. And, they're looking for continued opportunities to interconnect the assets here. But they echoed similar concerns about the reservoir protection areas and the buffers, and their emphasis continues to be on natural surface trails in this corridor. Not that they would be, necessarily opposed to a segment between their parks of being more if it were paved surface. But so that is an opportunistic thing that we're going to continue to monitor. Shifting gears a little bit, of course, our strong partnership with Nova Parks, together we are very well aware of local, state, and national grants and other funding opportunities, and we're pretty well ingrained, say Nova Parks and the county. So we're going to continue to look at those opportunities for the betterment of trails in the wider park facilities at Beaver Dam. And then, as I alluded to towards the beginning of the study, they jumped right in with a complementary study. So while we've answered the question, I hope, of, is a paved trail possible with this work, their ongoing study is going to look at how do we create the best possible community asset. I'll give the example. They see, and I've experienced this personally with my kids out there, even that section between Mount Hope Road and Reservoir Park, there are some near-term improvements they'd like to see happen there leading up to the grand opening of Reservoir Park, which I think is a good thing. And so I'm going to, in terms of next steps, I think, really looking to see what the final results of Nova Parks work is on a phased approach to trail development out there. And then, allow that to help in concert with this work that we've done, really help guide the board in a decision on and our partnership with Nova Parks, and allow that to guide things going forward. And so I'm going to hand it over to Paul Gilbert to say a few words about the ongoing work that they're doing. So for those of you that on the call may not know Paul, he's the executive director at Nova Parks.
Thank you, Alton. And I'd like to, I'm sure the board recognizes this fully, but the report that you just saw is the result of a great deal of work. So I'd like to appreciate and thank Alton and other staff at Loudon Water for putting together this very comprehensive report, and the time and effort that went into that. So what you saw was basically a feasibility for what it would take to build a paved trail around Beaver Dam. And parallel to that, we are working on a concept plan. And so we've contracted with another landscape architect firm that has some expertise in this area. And we're really looking at taking the existing elements, the gravel road you heard about, the more primitive just path through the woods, and thinking about a number of things with that to improve it. One is, are we even following the best route? We're currently working on rerouting and rebuilding sections of our Bull Run Occoquan trail that runs along the Occoquan Reservoir, because it was laid out 40, 50 years ago, and it was not laid out in a very environmentally sustainable way. It was just getting from point A to point B. And in looking at things in the environmental sustainability perspective, you're more interested in following the contours of the land so you have less up and down for erosion, and looking at some of those considerations so that as we improve the trail over time, we're actually in the right place. Then we're going to be looking at all the stream crossings and wetland areas and other obstacles that we need to get through to have it be a robust, good trail that thousands of people can use. And while much of it may be natural surface, that still means that there will probably be structures, culverts, bridges, boardwalks, other things like that. And so the study will look at where those need to be and will give us a cost estimate of them, and will allow us then to prioritize what are the elements that need to be tackled first, second, and third. We're also looking at having various levels of projects. So if they can help us define the simpler projects that could be done maybe at an Eagle Scout level, then we can start working with the scouting community on those elements. Meanwhile, we'll be permitting and financing the more substantial infrastructure things that need to be done to improve the trail. So I'm very excited about having all of those elements, and I think what we are thinking about is it being primarily a natural surface, and maybe in many areas gravel and stone dust to improve it, and then attacking the areas that need to be improved more. We're going to take this list of projects. We'll share it with Loudoun Water staff. We'll work on prioritizing it, and then in the fall we adopt our capital budget, and it's a rolling 5-year budget. Our plan is to take this prioritized list and work it into our capital budget, and really be thinking about the elements that we're going to fund directly, the elements that we will get grant funding for. We do grant work every year, and there are a number of sources that we rely on for this kind of project. There's a state grant program called the Recreational Trails Grant that we have success with every year. There's also a federal program called the Land and Water Conservation Fund that can also fund park level improvements, and this would fit right in with both of those categories. So if we budget money in our capital budget, that can then be match money that we use with the state and federal grants to improve this trail as we move forward. And then we'd love to come back to you in the fall with a little more complete plan of, here are the obstacles, here are the costs, here's our prioritization and our capital funding to move forward. I guess that kind of summarizes what we're doing. I think it complements very well with the report that you just saw from Alton, and we're looking forward to being your partner in developing a trail that will be very heavily used. I think with the paved trail that is going in already along Belmont Ridge Road that will connect up with the metro system, this becomes then a robust recreational trail, and will certainly be enjoyed by thousands every year. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
Mr. Campbell?
We got the video on. There's a little lag there. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for that. One comment from my perspective. I think there's a lot of value in having both. So I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not there on the argument that it's either paved or it's not paved. I'd like to have both. There's space for both, and I think both are valuable. So that's a thought on that. I also, in terms of, there's been a lot of references to the environmental impact of a paved surface path, and it certainly can, if it's done poorly. There's no doubt it can have a negative impact, primarily through water runoff, because we're not talking about nitrogen or phosphorus here. We're talking about runoff off the path if it's poorly designed. And I've spent some time over the years, and even recently, talking with WSSI and Mike Rolband. They're one of the top experts, as you all know. We've used them for lots of projects with Loudoun Water on environmental issues, water quality issues, and I think from my perspective, the important thing is that a paved surface can absolutely be constructed in a way that's not negatively impacting water quality or the environment. That's possible, but it has to be designed appropriately in order to do that. But it's not a situation where we're having to choose between environmental quality or the health and the welfare of the community by having paved paths. So we can have it both ways, but yes, it has to be done correctly. It has to be done thoughtfully, and I agree with that. And yes, that adds to the expense. Supervisor Turner spoke about this some months ago, and I spoke to him as early as 2 days ago or yesterday with some of his staff. But he represented that that himself, Supervisor Buffington, Supervisor Glass, Briskman, all the supervisors represented sort of in this area are very supportive of additional bike infrastructure to support the metro, and understanding that we have limitations as an authority, what we can spend money on and so forth, understanding that there's an approval process here. You know, he continues to state that he'd like us to consider giving the county easements for bike paths, and then let the county deal with allocating funds, dealing with the permitting and so forth. And so I think that's something, you know, colleagues on the board here too, that we ought to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I actually had a quick follow-up question for you. When you speak in terms of supporting the metro, are you speaking to that this then becomes a destination that helps provide ridership for the metro to bring people out to then jump on, you know, the trail systems that lead over to Beaver Dam, and then it's a destination to do bike riding around the reservoir? Are you looking at it from a different perspective? I just want to be sure I fully understand the kind of the intent behind that.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. The thought process is we want to get, in order for Metro to work, we got to get people out of their cars. And in Ashburn, Brambleton, you know, that this is the burbs, it's the suburbs. And so people get in their car to go to everything, including parks. When my wife and I take our kids to some of the parks in Ashburn here, we get in the car. And that's what everybody does. And so in order to make Metro work, we got to get people out of their cars. And this is part of that overall systemic cultural change here, particularly in this area, where we want people to be able to bike and walk to amenities like this park, to shopping, to there's going to be office at the Metro, at the Claude Moore property, and also at Silver District West. So you got work, you got play, you've got recreation, you've got shopping, all of this. It all can be accessible by bike, and people can get out of their cars. It reduces traffic, it reduces congestion. It's a positive impact on the air quality, on the water quality, less money and real estate being allocated towards parking lots. Biking's much more efficient in that respect. So that's kind of the global perspective here, and particularly in this bike shed, this 3-mile area here. And it's not a hard line, but you know, again, you take a look at that FTA study. They list examples from Los Angeles, from Minneapolis, from Atlanta, where they've got metro stations. And in order to make these things work, you got to pull people in walking and biking. It doesn't work to have everybody get in their car to go to Metro. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for those insights. Any other questions that I can help answer?
I appreciate everyone's time, and this has been a real pleasure to work with the Loudoun Water staff and board on this project. It is truly one of the most exciting ones that any of us have a chance to work on, and is going to serve the public in so many ways.
Yeah, thanks again, Paul. And, you know, again, if the board's agreeable, I think, you know, allowing you guys to finish up your work and we can, you know, understand those results and move forward.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Alton, is that the end of the presentation?
That is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
All right, great. Great presentation. Thanks, Paul, for your input too. And wow, very informative. Thank you. I just wanted to tell Angeline that I changed my sunset to a Hawaii sunset for you.
You better stop doing that, Mark. It's not nice.
Okay, by the way, I took these pictures. They're not like coming off of Time Life. Let's see, where are we? We are now on the Finance Summary Monthly Report by Brian Carnes, I believe. Is that where we are? Yeah, yes. Okay.
Yes, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have about the report.
All right. Seeing none, the Water Resources Report, I didn't really see anything negative on it. Is there anything that I missed, Alton?
I don't believe so, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. And don't know, Hue, if we have any anything special in the water and sewer agreements. All right, well, let's see. I believe we're going to go into a closed meeting, and I motion for, I can't remember these things.
Mr.
I motion
Chairman,
to go
yeah,
into it.
We need a motion from a board member to go into a closed meeting, and you can see the description of the items under the item 10A on your board docs agenda.
Okay. I'll make the motion. Pursuant to section 2.23711 of the Code of Virginia, I move that the board of this authority enter into a closed meeting. The authority for this closed meeting is found in section 2.23711A, subsections 3 and 7. The items to be discussed are, number 1, a discussion of potential disposition of real estate, and number 2, consultation with legal counsel on A, litigation regarding a customer lien, and B, threatened litigation regarding an access easement. Can I get a second?
Second.
This is Angeline. Okay, Jonathan, I have a question for you. So when we go into a closed meeting, does the chair need to actually pronounce the agenda? Because I feel like this is not a consistent pattern. This is sometimes we do this and sometimes we don't. Now, a closed meeting can be, a closed meeting for different reasons. So I just wanted to gain your insight on that.
So the Freedom of Information Act provisions do require that we identify, at least generally, the items that are to be discussed, as well as the authority for the closed meeting. And that's why the motion that Mr. Kobliss just read includes both of those items. And we try to include that in all of our closed meeting motions.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for verifying that.
Did you get the second, Jewel?
I have Angeline as the second, and
Okay.
then we need to take a vote.
Is there any discussion first besides? Okay, go at roll call, Jewel.
Yes, Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Byers is absent. Mr. Bonfils?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Sursakar?
Yes.
Mr. Sultan?
Yes.
And Mr. Kobliss?
Yes.
And board
Okay,
members?
Are you going to tell them what to do?
Yes, board members need to leave this meeting, go to your calendar, and join the closed session meeting. So we'll wait a few minutes to make sure everybody gets into the meeting. Thank you.
Like magic.
Even managed to hack on with my speedy DSL internet connection.
All right, let's run this, Mark. You're muted.
Trying to find the document I'm supposed to read.
Motion to adjourn the closed meeting is first, sir.
All right, I motion to
I
adjourn.
set- Second, Mark.
All right. And roll call vote, Mr. Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Byers is absent, Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell, I think is also absent for the vote, Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Thursakar,
Yes.
Sultan,
Yes.
Mr. Koblis.
Yes, so now I'm going to motion to certify the closed meeting, whereas the Board of Directors of the Loudoun County Sanitation Authority has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas 2.23712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the Loudoun County Sanitation Authority that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Loudoun County Sanitation Authority hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law, and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second from Marty.
All right, roll call.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Byers is absent, Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell is absent, Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Thursakar,
Yes.
Mr. Sultan,
Yes.
and Mr. Koblis.
Yes, and now Jonathan, I believe you have a motion or something that
Yes,
we need
please.
to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the board would move to authorize legal counsel to settle the Mark Hall litigation on the terms discussed in closed session, I would appreciate that.
So moved, Mr. Sean.
Second, Mark.
Second.
Any discussion?
Aye.
All right, Mr.
Ju-
Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfils,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell is absent for the vote, Mr. Kelly,
Aye.
Mr. Moody,
Aye.
Thursakar,
Oh my God, I don't want to say aye. Okay, aye.
Mr. Sultan,
Aye.
and Mr. Koblis.
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Can I have a motion? Terry motions, I second. Any discussion? Jewel, go ahead. This is to close the meeting.
Yes, sir, Mr. Allen,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfils, Mr. Byers is absent, Mr. Bonfils,
Aye.
Mr. Campbell absent for the vote, Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Aye.
Thursakar,
Aye.
Mr. Sultan,
I'm not sure. Okay, aye.
and Mr. Koblis.
Aye.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. You too.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.